Thank you so much for joining us today for another workshop in collaboration with the Anthropology Career Readiness Network. Today's topic is exploring domains of practice. And the workshop today is facilitated by Riall, who will also tell you more about what's going to be happening today. And yeah, on that point, I would just head over to you, Riall.
Right, thank you very much. So before we begin this session, let me show you some information about upcoming sessions. Our next slide shows you 3 of the upcoming webinars that we have. On the 23rd, it's a webinar about informational interviews. On the 21st of May, it's about turning your CV into a resume. And on June 18th, the final one in this series is about how to talk about your anthropology to other people in your life, colleagues, employers, friends, etc. So that's what we're going to be doing in the future. But what we're going to be doing right now is talking about domain analysis. And I'm going to be your facilitator for this. My name is Riall Nolan, and I will be explaining all of this to you today. I'm a social anthropologist. I'm British trained, University of Sussex. I had a fairly long career in international development, and then I came back to the United States and became a university administrator in charge of international programs. I'm now retired. I'm retired out of Purdue University, which is in Indiana. I taught courses in applied and practicing anthropology there. Since I've retired, I have started working with Jennifer Studebaker and Elizabeth Bridey on our Anthropology Career Readiness Network, which is supposed to be trying to transform the way that anthropology is taught so that our graduates are better prepared for non-university employment. This is the Anthropology Career Readiness Network. Some of you are already familiar with this. We have a website. We have lots and lots of resources available, as you can see, for people. Most of these are on our website, which is at the bottom of this slide, anthrocareerready.net. And we have a book, which is in the lower right-hand corner here, called Career Tools for Anthropology. You can buy that through Amazon. It's not very expensive. We're going to produce more books in the future, but for the moment, that's the one we have, and I think you'd find it quite interesting. So let's take a look at what we're going to do today. We'll start by explaining what domains are and jump from that into looking at how practice work is structured. What kinds of things do practitioners, anthropology practitioners, do? I'll then show you how to develop a job scenario which will help you with your job search. A job scenario will help you pick out a domain or area of work to be focused on. We'll look at what domain analysis is and how it can help you. I'll give you a couple of examples, simple examples from daily life. Domain analysis is a well-known anthropological technique, at least in the United States, and so we have lots of examples. And then we're going to walk you through using the technique to explore job opportunities that might be of interest to you. I'll use an example from international development because that's a domain that I know fairly well, but the kinds of things we're going to be talking about, you can do this with any domain at all. I'll let you do a couple of exercises along the way, and there'll be plenty of time to ask and answer questions when we get done. So let's get started and talk about what are domains and why are they important in the job search. Domains of practice are areas of professional activity: education, health, international development, security, food, agriculture. All of these things are areas of professional activity where people work. But every one of these domains or sectors of work is somewhat different. Different domains have different structures, they have different components, they do different things, and they do those things in different ways. They also have very different requirements for getting a job in those areas. And the more you know about this, the more effective your job search is going to be. So job seekers have an interest in learning about specific domains in order to increase their chances of finding work there. And one of the ways to find out about a domain is to use what we're calling domain analysis. Very simple, very effective, and it doesn't take a long time. But it begins with what we call a visioning exercise, which is your own personal job scenario. So let's talk a little bit about how to construct a job scenario. It helps if you understand how practitioners' jobs are actually organized. All practitioners, and I would say just about everybody in the world who actually has a job, the job can be broken down in terms of four main elements. One thing is the base. Who's paying you for this? Who are you working for? So you might be working for a government. You might be working for a nonprofit agency. You might be working for yourself. You might be working for a corporation. You might be working for a university. Somebody's paying you. Somebody is supporting you in your job. The second of these elements is the domain itself. So what's the domain you're working in? I gave you a few examples a moment ago. Here are some others. This is not an exhaustive list. There are many more, but just as examples: social services, public administration, agriculture, the environment, international development, blah, blah, blah. When we get to the point of showing you how this works, I'm going to pick international development and the environment as the two domains that we're going to look at. But within those domains, you have a job function. What are you actually doing there? You're working in the environment, but what are you doing there? You could be managing, you could be in charge of production or implementation, design, training. Again, these are examples. They're not the full range of things. Many people indeed do different things all in the same job. They move from doing training or doing production or implementation to doing evaluation at the same time. So jobs are all a little different in that way. And then finally, there's the setting. Where are you doing this? Are you working locally in your own community? Are you working nationally in your own country? Are you working internationally? Or do you jump around? And some days you're here and some days you're there. So all of the practitioners that we know have jobs that fall into these sort of basic categories. And when you talk to people about their jobs, these are the things that they will tell you. So from that, you can develop a job scenario. And your job search begins with a vision of what sort of job you'd like, and that depends on the scenario that you construct. It's your own story about what is the job that will bring together your values, your interests, and your skills. And the thing that I always say to people is, don't let skills determine what sort of a job you go looking for. You've all been to school for many years. You've all been told that skills are very important. You need to work on your skills. You need to learn these skills. Yes, that's all very true. But you should be guided at least as much by your values and your interests, because values are things that really matter to you. They're your own personal ideas of right and wrong, better and worse. Interests are things that excite you, that interest you, that you're curious about, and that get your energy going. If you choose a job simply because you have the skills to do the job, it might turn out to be both a boring job because it doesn't match your interests, and it might turn into a soul-destroying job because it offends your values. So don't do that. Look first and foremost at your values and interests, and then match that with your skills, because you can always learn new skills. Whereas it's very, very hard to ask someone to change their basic values. Why would they want to do that? They probably won't be very happy. And you are interested in what you're interested in. So there's no point in somebody saying, well, you need to be interested in other things. You might be interested in other things later on, but start your job search from the standpoint of your interests and your values, and let the skills come along later. So you use those things to create a job scenario. You sit back and you ask yourself, what kind of a job would I like to do in, say, 3 years after I graduate from school? what general domain do I want to be working in? Where do I want to be? What do I see myself doing in that domain? And who am I working for there? And you can do this while you're sitting back in your chair, having a beer or a cup of coffee. It's just an exercise in imagination. You're making it up to see how it feels. And if you don't like one scenario, you can go and make another scenario. It's a fantasy, in other words. It isn't real. It doesn't commit you to do anything, but it is a way to start, okay? And so if you know where it is you want to wind up, you'll have a better job search. It'll be more effective. So if you do this, you'll see how it leads you then forward into an examination of that particular domain. So I'll give you an example of a job scenario that I made up based on what many students over the years have told me their scenario was. I used to teach international development, so this is a scenario about international development. And here it is. You write it down in one paragraph. And I'm going to just read it out to you. I know you can all read, but I want to just make sure you see what's going on here. In 3 to 5 years after I graduate, I see myself as working in international development. There's your domain. Involved in community development, community level environmental education, even more specific now. In projects overseas, where's the setting? Preferably in Latin America or Africa. I would really like to be working at the grassroots level for the first part of my career, doing research on environmental problems with local people and helping to turn these into successful education projects. Later on, I'd like to get into upper level policy making once I have the skills and experience to do so. I think I would be happiest working for a bilateral or multilateral agency, but I might want to move around a bit, both in terms of where I work and who I work for. That's a scenario. That's a fairly dense, fairly complicated, fairly complete scenario. What I'd like y'all to do now is to do your own scenario for me, but focus not on all of those details, but on the domain. So think about, where would I like to be working? What domain would I like to be working in after I graduate from school? Or after I've successfully obtained my job? What kind of a job is it? What's the domain? So what I'd like you to do is sit back for just a minute, let your imagination roam, think about what kind of work would make you happy and fulfilled, which is in line with your values and your interests and possibly some of your skills. Take 5 minutes to do this. Don't focus on the details. Just tell us what the domain is that you'd like to be working in, and put that domain, put a name of that domain into the chat, okay? And what we're going to do is just look at all the different things that you've written down, and we'll have a little discussion. It won't take long, just a few minutes, about all the domains that you've identified. So if you can do that for me right now, and in 5 minutes, I will call time and we will start a discussion about that. Thanks. Okay, Jennifer, can you,
Yeah, to briefly summarize, we've got a lot of people who are interested in working in different types of consultancies, cultural heritage, around issues of gender, working with children, around the environment, food sites, around issues of migration and human rights. Yeah.
any outliers, anything that strikes people as really unusual?
I was going to call out the person that's into being a Montessori teacher. That's pretty clear path there for you.
When we, at the end of this, when we have an opportunity just for an open discussion, I would like to know from people how difficult it was to do this. Some people have probably been thinking about this for a long time. Others maybe not so much. And I'm just kind of curious to know, how difficult do people think it's going to be to make up a scenario when the time comes? And as I said, some people may have already done it, and they think, oh yeah, let's move on. We don't need to do that anymore. And other people may never have done it. what I find is that putting a scenario together is a sort of an essential first step in trying to figure out how to plan a career. Because if you don't have some idea of where you're wanting to end up, where you're wanting to go in the end, you'll waste time. It won't be very efficient, and furthermore, you may make some sort of mistakes and decisions along the way. So having a clear idea of the destination is a good idea at this stage. Let me move then to the next part of this, which is the domain analysis itself. Domain analysis, if you are an anthropologist, you may have heard of this. If not, this is a very well-known, extensively used technique, at least in the United States and in Britain. It was pioneered by linguists as a way to deconstruct language, but it's used for all sorts of things. It's quite simple. It's fairly quick to do, and it can be applied to almost any sector of human activity that you want to name. Today, what is very interesting is that we can do two things that we couldn't do back when I was a student and learning how to do this. We had to actually sit down with a notebook in our hand and either observe a situation for days on end or talk to actual people for days on end in order to figure out how to do this. We still do those things, but now we have online searches, we have Google, we have all the different search engines that we can use to help us do this. We have social media to help us do this. And we have these new AI, these large language models like ChatGPT to help us do it. And these things may have their disadvantages and people may not like them for some things, but believe me, they are excellent for this kind of work. So I would say go ahead and use them. They're going to help you a lot. So for your scenario, whatever your scenario was, whatever the domain was that you picked, the domain analysis is going to show you what the terrain looks like, what the geography of that domain is. How is it put together? How do the parts connect? What's it like? And this in turn is going to help you understand where the jobs are and what those jobs are like. So there are some steps, and on the left-hand side of this particular slide, you'll see an upside-down triangle, and that is to indicate that it is a search which gets finer and finer as it goes on. It gets more and more focused as it continues. The first thing you do is select a domain. You've already done that. When you constructed your job scenario, you told us what domain you'd like to work in. Then what you do is you start networking, you start your online research, and you start asking questions about the domain. What's it like? What does it mean? What are the terms? How are they defined? As you do that, you will be able to identify important subdomains. You're starting to get an idea now of how this domain is constructed. And so you are building a conceptual map of how this place works. Then what you want to do is focus on one of those. I gave you a fairly detailed scenario, which wasn't just about international development. It started talking about the environment and about education. Remember that? And so within the domain of international education, you are now looking for the environment. You're looking for the things that involve education because that's where you think you want to go. Once you get those subdomains listed out in your mind, you focus on one of those to investigate further. You figure out how that's put together and why the parts are arranged the way they are. And at this point, you know a lot now about that domain. And you are able to figure out where are the jobs, where are the kinds of things that I would like to do, where are they located? Let me give you some examples of how this works without jobs. These are some things that are pulled out of textbooks. So here's one. This is a domain analysis of types of vehicles. And so you can do this in a descending way or an ascending way. You can ask yourself, vehicles, interesting. Are there different kinds of vehicles? And people say, oh yeah, there are trucks and there are cars, really. And are there different kinds of trucks? Sure. There are pickup trucks and there are semi-trailer trucks. Well, what about cars? Are they different? Oh, yes. We have sports cars, we have station wagons. So, and this can go on and can get very, very complicated. That is simple right now, but it gives you an idea of how someone who came from a culture, a country, or a planet where they didn't have cars or vehicles of any kind would understand the different things that people were talking about. This is more of a linguistic analysis. And interestingly enough, all of the terms in this particular slide for vehicles are American terms, American English terms. If I were doing this in Britain, all of these terms would be different. If I were doing it in Australia, most of them would be different again. So it's not just the way the world is, it's the way the world is according to somebody, okay, according to people in a particular place. Let me give you another example. Here's one that was done by James Spradley about how kids in a middle school see themselves. They went around, they asked a bunch of kids in middle school, they said, so tell us about this place. Who's in the school? And this is how it came out. On the one hand, you have the kids. You also have cleanup men, that is the janitors, the custodians, the people who come in and sweep the floors at night. You have the school nurse, you have the substitute teachers or subs, and you have the faculty members. Now the kids divide themselves in very interesting ways. There are the kids who cause trouble. There are the kids who are good kids. There are the kids who are smart. There are the kids who are sort of not one or the other. There are the cool kids, the sad kids, and the loners. That's the way these kids divided themselves. You might say, well, in my school, they didn't do it that way. That's fine, because this is a technique for doing ethnography in one place with one group of people. Moving over, though, to the faculty, you see something really interesting. They have a lot of different kinds of teachers. They distinguish between all sorts of teachers and the people who are the bosses of those teachers, the principal, the assistant principal, and so forth. The principle here, the linguistic principle here is very simple, which is that the more terms you have for something, chances are the more important that is to you. And so if you're a kid in middle school, the teachers are real important to you. They're your bosses. And so are the other kids around you. But the guys that come in at night and sweep the floors, the school nurse, the substitute, no, nobody cares much about them. So they only have one category. All right, so those are two very simple examples of how this is used. Let's go back and try and do this for ourselves. And I just want to, this is the same slide you saw just a second ago. We're going to select a domain. We've already done that. We're going to look at how the domain is put together. We're going to pick a part of the domain and focus in on it, figure out how that's put together, and then finally figure out what goes inside that. So it looks like this. With international development, we'll do some networking, some online research. We'll call in ChatGPT to help us, and we'll identify some subdomains. And we'll ask ourselves, so what happens in those subdomains, and who does those things? And then we'll pick something out of that to look at even further, and we'll ask, so what happens there? And how does that work? So let's, using our example of international development, let's start looking at subdomains. What do development organizations do? Okay. So to get started, I asked ChatGPT to tell me about this. And this is what it came up with. Everything on the left-hand side is, these are the things that people do when they say we're doing international development. They do all these different things. This is how this domain is put together. And if you go down the list, you come to environmental sustainability and climate resilience. And since we're interested in the environment, we're going to pick that one to look at in more detail. And so ChatGPT will say to you, well, here's the focus of that particular subdomain. Here's the kinds of stuff that happens there. And here are the organizations that do those things. So we can take it further and say, okay, within the environmental sustainability subdomain, what happens there? And this is breaking it down even further. So under the environment, these are the kinds of things that happen. And I went down the list and I picked agriculture and land use because I was interested in that. And what it told me was there are a number of government, non-government, and corporate organizations that work in this area. And I thought, that is where the jobs are. Okay, let's pick one of those and let's look at it and take it apart. So I picked development agencies such as USAID. Now, it's ironic because if you've been watching the news, you probably know that USAID has been disbanded in the United States, although a judge yesterday said they have to put it back together again. So we're all very interested in how that's going to work. Never mind, for purposes of our webinar today, just pretend, go along with me, that USAID is still here. But this is how development organizations are put together on a global scale. You have bilateral agencies which belong to countries. So USAID is the American one, DFID is the British one, CETA is the Canadian one, and we could go on, there are others. Multilateral agencies are composed of more than one country, and we know these from the World Bank Group, for example, the UN agencies or the regional development banks. Then you have private and nonprofit groups of all sorts, consulting firms, NGOs, universities, foundations, institutes, and then finally there's a sort of a residual category of others, which include corporations. Believe it or not, corporations do a lot of development work these days. Diaspora groups, which are people who have moved from one part of the world to another, but are engaged in development work at home. And then you have the military and other organizations like that. And again, believe it or not, the military does a lot of development work when it's not fighting. Okay, so these kinds of organizations. So we'll pick out USAID as an example, and now we're going to drill down and we're going to learn more about that one agency. And this is what we find. Now, I didn't need to use ChatGPT for this because I know this already from fairly long experience. So it was relatively easy to go on USAID's website a few months ago and look at what kinds of sectors of activity they engage in. And here is the list on the left-hand side. And once again, we see that the environment and climate change are prominent in their list of activities. So I went into that and I said, what does that mean inside this agency? And what I found is over on the upper right, it goes from global climate change down through a bunch of other things into, believe it or not, sustainable tourism. Okay, all of those different things are things that this agency does under the rubric or the umbrella of environment and global climate change. Then I got interested and I said, well, where do they do these things? And it turns out that USAID has 165 different projects in over 70 countries. And I thought, which are the countries? I drilled down on that. And one of those countries happens to be a country that I like very much, and that's Kenya. So I thought, let's go to Kenya and look at what's going on in the realm of environment and climate change in Kenya that's funded by USAID. And we're back now to the lower left-hand side. And here are all the projects that USAID, this was about 5 years ago, is doing in Kenya that relate to the environment and climate change. And I picked out one of those, a drylands management program. And I thought, let's find out what that's about. So the final stage in my domain analysis was to look at that particular project. And here is what I found. This is taken straight off USAID's website. It tells you, it gives you an overview of what's going on. It tells you the kinds of things they're doing. It tells you how much funding they have. It tells you how long the project lasts for. And then on the right-hand side, look at that. It actually gives you the names and the telephone numbers of the people who are running the project. Think about that. That's great. So now you know who to talk to. So if you do this, you can do this in a couple of hours. You will be able to understand where are the jobs and what sorts of jobs are they. You can get in touch with these folks. You can arrange an informational interview with them if you want to, which is the subject, by the way, of the next webinar, and you can take it from there. If you don't like what you found out using this particular domain analysis, fine. Pick another domain, do another scenario, and work the same process, and you'll get a different result. So a final exercise for you, okay, is this. The domain analysis is going to lead you to where the jobs are, but it will only do that if you have a destination in mind. The vision scenario gives you the destination, the domain analysis helps you explore it, and it will turn up the places where you can go to conduct informational interviews. So, jumping ahead just a little bit now, for your final exercise, take another 5 minutes and do this. Write down on the chat 1, 2, or 3 questions that you would like to ask somebody working in that domain. So imagine that you have got that guy from Kenya on the phone. What are you going to ask him? Give us an example of what you'd like to find out from somebody working in the domain that you previously identified. I'm going to give you 5 minutes to do that, and we're going to then discuss those at the end. Okay, thanks.
Maybe just to clarify, so the task is to come up with questions for your domain, right? Or for the example domain, so for their domain.
Now, for their own domain, yeah.
Perfect. Yeah.
I was just reading through your questions on the chat, and I was very, very impressed, I have to say, with the kinds of questions that you are asking. I think those are all really good questions. I mean, they are questions about what's it like to work here, you know, which is a really good question. Questions like, how did you come to work in this domain? Again, very good. Which is so anthropological, isn't it? It's a sort of a life history. Tell me how you got here, you know, what led up to that. The other questions were things like, what sort of qualifications should somebody have, you know, to do this kind of work? And a few of you talked about language abilities or about specific methods and so forth. These are such smart questions, folks. I mean, I am really quite impressed. In our universities, when I was teaching anthropology, the students were asking each other these questions. And because none of them had actually worked in these domains, or very few of them ever had, the answers they were getting were sort of speculative. And then they would go and ask their professors. And because most of their professors had never worked in these domains either, the answers they were getting were equally speculative. But you are going to go and ask the actual people who live and work in those domains these sorts of questions, and they are really excellent questions. So I just wanted to say that. When we do the next webinar, I think it's Elizabeth is going to talk to you about doing informational interviews, and that is where we will go into more detail about how to ask questions like that and learn from them about the things that happen. So bravo, thank you so much for that. I don't know if anybody else has got a comment that you want to make about those questions. If we have a couple of questions, we can do it. Otherwise, I would just open it up to questions in general from any of you, and I can either answer them myself or let some of my colleagues here answer them. So let's talk about what it is you want to know now.
Ellie's got a fun one. Which of your books do you recommend the most, Riall?
My books. You mean
I was gonna say, is this including his novels?
You mean the anthropology books or the novels? Which ones? I think you mean the anthropology books. Okay, so if you shameless self-promotion, this is probably the most useful book for folks like you. Okay, it's US based, but believe me, there's not that much difference between what I'm talking about for a US student and what I would be talking about for people like you. The world works the same way for all of us. And so this book is coming out in a new edition, but it's going to be a while. So I would suggest that, you know, you don't wait. You can get this used pretty cheaply. So I would do that. There are other good books, though, in the area of applied and practicing anthropology. One of them by my colleague Sherry Briller is very good about showing you exercises to get you to think about job scenarios and about how you need to prepare yourself. And then the final thing that I would urge everybody to take a look at is the one I mentioned right at the beginning, which is this one. Got a post-it note on it. That's the one that Acorn has put together. Jennifer put this together. Jennifer Studebaker, the person who's right there in front of you today. There she is. This is her book, basically, and it's a very, very good one. So I see a question, how different is that book from Anthropology in Practice? Oh, okay, well, Anthropology in Practice was written in 2001, 2002. This one was written in 2017. Anthropology doesn't change that fast. So Anthropology in Practice is still a pretty good book. Either one is good. The one I just showed you, Using Anthropology in the World, is a longer version. It's got more stuff in it. The other book is called The Handbook of Practicing Anthropology. That is a collection of articles by individual practitioners. And it's also very good. Right. Other questions? How confident are you? How easy was it for some of you to think about constructing a scenario? Is that, I mean, some people seem to have very little difficulty doing this. Other people, it's a big deal. I see one hand up. Natalia, is that right? Yes, there you are.
Hi. Thank you so much for the presentation. First of all, it's very lovely to hear all this, because I feel like I've been on a lot of career webinars and so on, but this is the first one I know with like-minded people in terms of anthropology. I did have a question and sort of also could share a bit my experience with this. So I am on my bachelor right now in business anthropology, and I do have a dream of working in a consultancy firm that's that's helping businesses and organizations based on social sciences. I do have one specific consultancy in mind, and so in that way, thinking of a scenario was very easy for me. My question is to you. What advice do you have for a person that, I do need to find some sort of job right now, and I am not qualified yet, definitely, to be a consultant, not even close, probably. But what advice do you have to not steer off that dream, in the practicalities of life?
Yeah. Okay, well, I got two pieces of advice, one after the other. Any job is better than no job. It's better for your psychological health. It's better for your financial health. It's better for you professionally. I mean, obviously, don't take me literally. Not every job, but a job is better than no job. So while you are waiting for your ideal job or your better job to come along, don't hesitate to take some form of work. It will pay you some money. It will put you in touch with other people, and it will allow you to practice your social skills, your anthropological skills, your organizational skills, right? No matter what it happens to be. At the same time, if you go through this this domain analysis and this informational interviewing, you can be working at the same time at networking, finding people to talk to, and asking them the kinds of questions that you all have been putting into the chat, so that you are able to assess your own skill set and your own experience against the requirements of a particular job. And if you keep doing that and you don't get discouraged, eventually you're going to find somebody who says, you know what, you're just the person we've been looking for. I'm serious. Either that, or you will learn something to the effect that, if I just go back and brush up on my French, I'll be able to get that job. And that will move you forward. So that's my advice to you. Don't despair. This is all going to work for you. because all
Yeah.
of you are smart and you're focused. Sorry, Jennifer, go ahead.
Oh, you're fine. I was going to add on top of that too. Once you do that domain analysis of sort of like consultancy, my familiarity with most consulting firms is that there's usually some entry level roles. It may be a coordinator, it might be an analyst, where you can get some of the, you know, do some of the grunt work, but to get familiarity with that domain too. So, you know, I think all of us want to start as directors as soon as we get out of grad school, but sometimes you got to put in the hours too. So, think about that as you're looking at your next steps.
And one thought also from my experience is, of course, if you can afford that and if you have the opportunity to, also for me personally, volunteer experience has turned out to be very valuable. Because at least for me, in my volunteer roles, I've usually had much more responsibility, got much more opportunity to learn because we're all there and you need to just make things happen. And even now when I have job interviews, often people mainly ask about those experiences. So of course, not everyone has the opportunity to spend a lot of time doing unpaid work, but that can also be very valuable down the line.
Right. Just two quick responses to things I see in the chat. Advice for a potential future digital anthropologist. Well, guess what? I'm not a digital anthropologist, and if I were to attempt to answer that question, I am pretty much sure I'd get it wrong. So I don't know, but you can find digital anthropologists quite easily through your network, and you should ask them. The second question is about a difference between having a Master of Science versus a Master of Arts. Personally, and this is just a personal opinion, I don't see any difference between, I mean, there are differences in what you have to do to get one, I get that. But in terms of being out in the world and using it to work, it all depends on what you learned. And I don't see much of a difference. I work with people all the time who have MSs, they have MAs, they have all kinds of degrees. And the question that I always ask them is, can you do this job? And if you can, fine. It doesn't really matter. We
You
had,
have two hands up, but there was one more question a bit further up in the chat that came up by Elena,
oh, okay.
where she was mainly asking about, you know, when you have these informational interviews, how do you really get kind of to the ground of the reality of the domain that you're interested in without people maybe focusing too much on the good things or the very personal subjective experience?
Oh, I see the subjective pain thing here. What are we, the bright side? Is that the one? Yeah, Elena? Is that the one you're talking about? Yeah. Well, okay, so anthropologists get good at talking to people. They get good at figuring out when people are not being completely honest with them. They get good at figuring out when people are shading the truth or sort of only telling part of the story. How do they deal with that? They don't confront people. That's not the research style that we adopt. But what we do is we find different ways of asking questions, and we ask different people the same question to sort of see how the answers might vary. That's how you have to do it. I understand that they do tend to talk on the bright side. They tend to be upbeat and present an optimistic view of things. And sometimes it takes a little digging to get underneath it. Oftentimes it's almost like a Japanese painting. You pay attention to what's not being said rather than what is being said. There are different ways of doing it, and it will make you a much better anthropologist. You already know how to do this if you've done ethnographic interviewing, so it's just a question of applying it there. So we had two raised hands. Can we go to Eli first and then number two, Umayma? Right, Eli. You are muted.
Hello?
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Great, thank you very much for a very useful webinar. I was wondering, in the domain of ethnographic consultancy, which a lot of people are interested in, the thing I hear about here in France is that since the COVID pandemic and since like Trump's election, especially, like the market is so uncertain that people are more hesitant about hiring ethnographic consultants or like ethnographic researchers or UX researchers, even in the freelance mode. So I was curious if you or Jennifer, who are practicing in that field, you saw that's trend in globally and not just in Europe or where I am, in terms of how shaky people are or worried they are about going in that direction, which they see. I've been told they see it as bonus, and when they're in economic uncertainty, they don't want to go too far in innovating and they restrict on the economic certainties they have at the moment. I don't know how common that is.
Yeah, I can
Well,
speak to this too.
You can speak to it. Go ahead, and then I'll chime in. Go on.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say there is a lot of uncertainty in the market, and I think we've seen this too with the large cuts that have happened around UX. Like research is usually the first to go
Yeah.
when people are looking at what they're going to cut on the budget lines. And yeah, in terms of the hesitancy, yeah, this definitely reflected in the United States as well. I can't speak for like Asia in terms of the consulting market, but yeah, I think people are holding their breath to see how things go.
Okay. And when you have a PhD, is it like sometimes I feel like it's almost like a disadvantage because it feels like you're older and you have less, you won't go into an internship necessarily. You will ask for, you don't want to go to an internship out just after you finished a few years long PhD. Is that a problem in terms of selling yourself? Do you think?
Yeah, but I wouldn't like turn your nose up at internships, and also look for fellowship opportunities too, because a lot of those can help you kind of get your foot in the door in terms of like potentially being hired too when a
Yeah, because many
opportunity opens
people,
up.
yeah, use internships to hire people, but it's just like after a PhD, the internship
Yeah.
doesn't seem like the right level, but whatever. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So here's the way I would say. I mean, I agree with everything Jennifer said, but I'd add a couple of things. One is that the concept of resilience, I think, is really important, and you need to sort of focus on what is it that you actually know how to do.
Mm.
What we are telling American younger anthropologists is whatever you thought you were studying when you went to graduate school and whatever you became a so-called expert in as a result of writing your thesis, what you are or what you should be talking about to other people is the fact that you are a problem solver. That's what you are. You are helping people solve problems because they may not be hiring people who are experts in, say, Mayan war implements or South Vietnamese agricultural practices, but they are hiring people who can solve problems. And you have learned to solve problems. Whether your professors sort of pointed you in that direction or not, that's the direction you should go in. And so what I say to people is that if you have a degree in business or a degree in engineering or a degree in law, when you get your diploma, when you get your degree, you're being given a key, and the key opens the door to a career for you. Anthropology graduates don't get a key. The key that the engineers get leads to a job in engineering. The key that a doctor gets leads to a job in medicine. But it only leads in that direction. It's only that one door that the key opens. What you get given as an anthropologist is a set of lock-picking tools which enable you to open just about any door. It's your methods and your approach. It's how you solve problems. That's what sets you apart from other people. And so if the market for UX dries up or the market for certain sorts of consultancies dries up, you can do other things because you're not a one-note musician. You can do all kinds of things. So think of it that way. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm taking up too much time. So we had one other question. Umaima, you had a question, sorry.
Hello, I am currently studying my bachelor's in anthropology and I'm in second year. I
Yeah.
am very much concerned about the, societal issues, and I really want to contribute in solving the real world problems and really want to go to the depth of the issues that are being occurred in our societies. So
Okay.
I basically want to become an ethnographic researcher. So I want you to suggest me or guide me about the abilities or skills or knowledge that an ethnographer should apply in conducting researches and solving the real world problems.
Well, if I had a real simple answer for you there, we'd all be doing it, wouldn't we? I mean, we'd have fixed all of these problems. Here's what I would say. I'm sorry, I'm not being facetious. I'm not trying to be. It's a very good question. I think that just about everybody who looks around thinks to themselves, we have to do better than this. And everybody then has to decide, so how am I going to help in that respect? I want to go back to domain analysis. I want to go back to looking at how sectors of human activity actually work, because if you understand how they actually work, then you can find the place where you belong in that domain that will do the most good. And it's a very personal choice. Where do you belong? people say to me, why on earth did you go off and work for the World Bank? It's an imperialist organization. I said, you know why I went off and worked for the World Bank? Because I needed to understand how it worked. It's huge. It dominates so many areas of overseas life. It's opaque. It's not democratic. I get all that. But I wanted to find out how it worked. And I did. And then I quit, not because I was disgusted, but because I had learned. And now, in my own personal life, I have adopted a way of doing my form of social change, which doesn't have anything to do with the World Bank, but is, to my mind, much more effective. So you need to look and sort of see, but hone your skills. If you're talking about being an ethnographic researcher, then get good at research. The second thing I would say to you is find a hero or a couple of heroes in your own life. Who are people that you have heard about? You may even know them, that you respect greatly, and that are doing the kind of work and having the kind of impact that you yourself would like to have someday. And find out how they got there. How did they do that? I used to talk to medical anthropologists all the time, young students who were interested in medical anthropology. And I said, who are your heroes? And finally, one of them said, I admire Paul Farmer. And I said, fine. Find out how Paul Farmer got to be Paul Farmer. What did he do? And they said, well, how am I going to do that? I said, call him up and ask him. He's not going to say no if you ask him an intelligent question. And judging from the questions that you all have put into the chat, you've got a bunch of very intelligent questions. So that's what I would say is find the people that you think are making a difference and then find out how are they doing what they're doing? How did they get to do that? That's all I would say to you. But you're on the right track and you're certainly got the right ideas. Okay, we may be out of time. I don't know. What do you think, Olivia?
Yes.
Over to you. Yeah.
So I think if there's no more questions, we're already a couple of minutes over, so I'll keep this very brief. But first of all, thank you so much, Riall, for today, for hosting this really interesting workshop. Please also, if you have time and if you have thoughts, please fill out the feedback. We really love hearing from you and want to make sure that this event series is working for everyone and we can always improve upon it. And yeah, if you have a question or a topic that you want to be covered in the event series at some point, feel free to suggest it on the Padlet. There you can also find the slides and other links from the previous events, and you can find all the recordings on our YouTube channel. If you want to know more about the Applied Anthropology Network, feel free to check out our website and follow us on our socials. And yeah, thank you so much for joining, and we hope to see you next time. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.